It started with a single phrase, three words that ripped through the already fractured American political landscape. Wannabe Hitler. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic firebrand known for her sharp tongue and unapologetic rhetoric, stood before cameras and microphones and said what many of her supporters had only whispered behind closed doors. She was talking about Donald J. Trump, the former president, the current candidate, and the figure who still dominates the Republican Party like a towering shadow. The reaction was immediate. Some gasped, some cheered, others recoiled in outrage. Was this a fearless exercise of free speech, or the dangerous normalization of language that could inspire more violence in an already divided nation? To understand why these words set off such a firestorm, we need to rewind. Jasmine Crockett has always been outspoken. She has called out corruption, racism, and authoritarian tendencies with a bluntness that made her both a target and a star. But when Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist, was murdered in shocking circumstances, the political temperature hit boiling point. In that tense atmosphere, Crockett doubled down. Instead of softening her tone, she defended it. Criticism, even harsh criticism, is part of American democracy. My words are not violence. My words are my right. For her, this was not just rhetoric, it was principle. For her critics, it was reckless fuel poured on a fire already raging across America. On one side, conservative lawmakers demanded accountability. They claimed Crockett's words were part of the culture of hostility that led to tragedy. On the other, progressives argued that silencing her would be the first step toward dismantling freedom of expression itself. So here we are, in the middle of a storm about the power of words, the boundaries of speech, and the fine line between criticism and incitement. Tonight, we dive deep into the controversy. We'll examine Crockett's statements, the political fallout, the reactions across the aisle, and ultimately, we'll confront the question that refuses to go away. Is this fearless truth-telling, or is it a threat to the nation's fragile peace? This is not just about Jasmine Crockett. It is about America, about who we are, what we tolerate, and how far we're willing to go to defend or to restrain free speech. The uproar over Jasmine Crockett's words didn't fade. It grew louder. Within hours, clips of her calling Donald Trump a wannabe Hitler exploded across social media. Millions of views, thousands of comments, hashtags trended, # free speech, # Crockett controversy, # wannabe Hitler. Conservative pundits seized on the moment. On Fox News, one anchor thundered, "This is not free speech. This is hate speech from the floor of Congress. If she can call Trump a Hitler, what's next? Calling his voters Nazis?" But on MSNBC, a progressive host countered, "What Crockett did was draw a line in the sand. If we're too afraid to name authoritarian behavior for what it is, then democracy itself is at risk." The clash played out in real time. A political tennis match volleyed between networks, Twitter feeds, and late-night comedy stages. Each side grew more entrenched, each side more convinced of its righteousness. In Congress, Republicans demanded Crockett face censure. They argued her rhetoric crossed a line and created a culture where violence was inevitable. Democrats, though divided, defended her right to speak. Some admitted privately they cringed at her phrasing, but publicly, few dared break ranks in an election year. The timing could not have been more explosive. The nation was still reeling from the murder of Charlie Kirk, a tragedy that exposed just how thin the line between politics and violence had become. Crockett's words, critics said, were proof of a dangerous escalation. Supporters replied that silencing her would only embolden those who would crush dissent. And so, the battle lines sharpened. Was Jasmine Crockett guilty of reckless provocation? Or was she, in fact, one of the few willing to speak uncomfortable truths? In living rooms, on college campuses, and in church pews, Americans debated not just her words, but the soul of free speech itself. What does it mean to live in a democracy where politicians compare rivals to dictators? Is that a defense of freedom, or the first step toward chaos? Crockett herself made it clear she wasn't backing down. In a fiery interview, she declared, "If we stop calling out dangerous behavior because we're afraid of upsetting someone, then we've already lost." The stage was set. This was no longer about one congresswoman's remark. It was about the collision of principle and politics, of speech and consequence, and America was about to learn just how high the stakes could climb. The storm reached its peak when the debate spilled out of Congress and into the streets. America was no longer just watching Jasmine Crockett. America was living her words. In Washington, crowds gathered outside the Capitol. On one side, banners praised Crockett, truth teller, courageous voice. On the other, furious signs screamed, "Crockett eels chaos. Words kill." Police stood in the middle. the line between order and chaos razor thin. Cable news became a battlefield. Conservative anchors painted her as the architect of division. Liberal hosts framed her as the symbol of resistance. Every headline, every chyron, every late-night joke amplified the divide. One commentator roared, "When Crockett calls Trump wannabe Hitler, she's saying millions of Americans who support him are complicit in fascism. That's not politics, that's war." But a progressive activist fired back, "No, what she's doing is sounding the alarm. If leaders act like strongmen, they should be called out." Crockett's words aren't hate speech, they're a warning. This clash was no longer about a single phrase. It was about identity, about democracy, about survival. College campuses erupted in debates. Professors held emergency panels on the limits of free speech. Talk radio lit up with callers, some cheering Crockett's courage, others demanding she be silenced. Families split at dinner tables. Arguments ended in slammed doors. The murder of Charlie Kirk hovered like a ghost over every conversation. His death became a symbol. For some, proof that reckless rhetoric breeds violence. For others, evidence that silencing voices only fuels extremism. Meanwhile, Crockett leaned further into the firestorm. On MSNBC, she declared, "If you think comparing Trump to Hitler is extreme, maybe you should ask why so many of his actions look extreme in the first place. The danger isn't my words. The danger is ignoring the warning signs." The nation was at an impasse. To defend Crockett was to defend the right to speak without fear, even if the words were incendiary. To attack her was to argue that words can be as dangerous as bullets. And in living rooms across the country, one question grew louder. When does speech stop being just speech and start becoming a weapon? Jasmine Crockett had forced the nation to look in the mirror. And what stared back was a country divided, trembling on the edge of something darker. As the dust began to settle, one truth became clear. Jasmine Crockett had forced America into a confrontation with itself. Her words, "wannabe Hitler," were no longer just a sharp phrase. They had become a mirror, reflecting a nation torn between fear and freedom. Was it courage, recklessness, or both at once? Her critics called for punishment. Some demanded censure in Congress. Others urged voters to throw her out of office. To them, her rhetoric wasn't just fiery. It was dangerous fuel poured onto an already burning fire. But her defenders stood just as firm. They insisted Crockett was doing what democracy demands, speaking truth to power, even when it offends. Silencing her, they argued, would silence millions who worry about creeping authoritarianism. This clash was never just about one lawmaker. It was about the First Amendment itself, the promise that allows both a whisper of dissent and a roar of defiance. Yet freedom is never without consequence. Words inspire, ignite, and sometimes destroy. And so, America stands at a crossroads. Should its leaders be held to a higher standard of restraint? Or should the battlefield of ideas remain unchained, no matter the risks? Jasmine Crockett's gamble is clear. She believes history will vindicate her. That calling Trump a wannabe Hitler is not hyperbole, but a warning. Whether that warning saves democracy or tears it further apart remains unwritten. And now, the question isn't only about her. It's about us, about how we, the people, choose to interpret the power of words. Will we let them unite us, divide us, or lead us down a path with no return? So what do you think? Was Jasmine Crockett right to speak so boldly, or did she cross a line that should never be crossed? Tell us in the comments below. If you found this breakdown thought-provoking, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who care about the future of free speech and democracy. Because this story is far from over.